What's up, folks, and welcome back to Dyce Reacts, where we are staying in London, England tonight. We are going to be checking out why the British think they're not part of Europe. Wherever side checks one out, we ain't going to waste no more time. We're just going to get right into it, folks. We're going to get right into it. Oh, yeah.
So, a question that I get all the time, especially since living in Germany, is why do the British think that they are not part of Europe? And I get it, it's a fair question, and to most Europeans, the answer feels obvious. You know, you're on the map, you're just across the channel, of course you're part of Europe. But geographic proximity does not dictate identity, and identity isn't about logic, it's emotional. And the truth is, the UK has never seen itself as European. And now, before people freak out in the comments, I get it. The UK itself is somewhat divided on this issue. You know, Scotland feels closer to Europe than Wales or England does. And the government's actions do not always represent the will of the majority of people. But for simplicity's sake, I am just going to talk about the UK and British identity as a whole. So even before Brexit, people spoke about Europe and the UK like they were two separate identities. You know, nobody says Europe and France, or Europe and Spain, or Europe and Germany, but Europe and the UK, that just kind of rolls off the tongue like it's always been the case. And when I moved to Germany over a decade ago, I came up against this misunderstanding very often. Germans would tell me all the time that, of course, the UK is Europe, not as a gesture of inclusion, but just as a matter of fact. You know, I think this is why Brexit was particularly painful for the Germans, and I had many situations where people were personally upset with me. They felt really hurt, you know, as if this was some kind of divorce they never got a say in. Now, just before we go any further, I am not your average Brit because I have lived outside of the UK now for almost 20 years. And in fact, I've almost lived outside longer than I have lived within the borders of the UK. And this changes you on a fundamental level. I feel very connected to Europe and also to the UK, but this is the exception. Not many people feel this way. You know, ask an average Brit in the UK if they feel European, and you'll usually just get a pause, maybe a vague shrug, or an outright no. And according to the latest Eurobarometer survey, 64% of people in the UK deny feeling European in any way. And so why is this? I'm
not gonna lie, this is a new concept. I've never heard that. That's why when I saw the title, I was like, I gotta check it out because I have no idea where this is going. This is completely new, so I'm taking everything in, hearing that for the first time.
What is it that makes the British feel different? Well, most people don't really know. You know, it's a feeling that if you really take the time to fully articulate, and many people will probably disagree with my take, but after thinking about this for some time, I think there are 6 main reasons which have contributed to this over time. Now, each one in isolation doesn't make the UK situation unique, but if you take all of these points together, I think it really goes a long way to explaining why this dissonance exists. So the first thing that makes the British feel separate from Europe is the geography. Now, I think this is pretty obvious. I'm sure you've heard of the island mentality before. The UK is physically separated from Europe, but it's not just the physical separation, it's what that separation allowed the UK to become. While Europe rose and fell through shifting borders and land wars, Britain had the luxury of distance. Britain didn't need to entangle itself unless it chose to, and that created a national psychology of watching from the shore, of stepping in only when it suited us. The English Channel isn't just a body of water, it's a psychological moat. It's a buffer between us and them. Now, the second thing which sets the UK apart is the empire. It gave Britain a global identity. While European countries were rebuilding themselves after the war, Britain still saw itself as managing the world, even though politically and economically Britain has lost relevance. Culturally and symbolically, it's more complicated. So historically, our focus has been outward, not inward. Our alliances stretch to places like India and Canada, Australia, not to Brussels or Berlin. Even today, many Brits still feel more at home talking to someone from Sydney or Toronto than they do to someone from Vienna or Barcelona. It's not just the language, it's the sensibility. The Commonwealth gave Britain a sense of being global, not continental. And I know that most people don't understand the Commonwealth, but all you really need to know is that while it has declined a lot, it is still in place. Some have joined it by choice, like Mozambique in 95 and Rwanda in 2009. And just like you can feel the remnants of communism in countries which were under communist rule, it is the same for Britain. You can still feel it in the national psyche, that lingering belief that Britain is more than just a European country, that it's something else, that it's something bigger. And I know many people mock the British for this. There's this certain...
He's talking about there are many moving parts to this that may make someone feel that way. UK actually feels bigger, like a bigger entity in and of itself. So it kind of like sees itself separate, or it gives certain people that kind of idealistic mindset that it's bigger than Europe. Yeah, so I'm getting there. We'll take it back just a bit.
Now, the third reason that makes the UK different is that we never had a revolution. We never had our Bastille moment. No guillotines, no radical upheaval of church or monarchy. Oliver Cromwell was very different to the revolutions in Europe because it was elite-driven. It was not a popular uprising, and it failed to do away with the monarchy. So most European countries had to reinvent themselves through force. But Britain evolved, slowly and reluctantly, choosing reforms instead of revolutions, adjustments instead of resets. We kept the monarchy, we kept our class system, we kept our continuity. And there's a deep conservatism at the heart of British identity, not necessarily politically, but psychologically. The British see themselves as the steady hand, while Europe is full of fervid ideologies. You know, we watch the continent swing from monarchy to fascism to communism and back again. And through it all, Britain stayed relatively stable. You know, Britain wore that stability and sense of looking on from the sidelines like a badge of honor, and to a certain extent it still does. The fourth point to note is that the legal DNA of Britain is just different. You know, the entire legal system is fundamentally different from that of most European countries. Britain runs on common law, Europe runs on civil law. And yes, before someone mentions it, I know that Scotland runs on a mix of both. But that difference is more than technical, it's philosophical. To cut a long story short, common law is bottom up. It builds on precedent case by case. It trusts the wisdom of history and the judgment of courts. It's built on real life events. Civil law is top down, it's codified, it's structured, and it's built from theory. This shapes how we think about authority, fairness, and rules. And so in Britain, the law is lived and interpreted, and in much of Europe, it's written and obeyed. And that's why British people instinctively bristle at bureaucracy and rigid systems and at rule by regulation. It's not arrogance, it's the deep structure of how the British think about freedom. And so perhaps, again, another reason why Brexit should not have come as a shock. The fifth point of importance is that Britain is one of the few European countries that still has a monarchy, not just in form, but...
Yeah, so definitely I can see this playing a major part as to why the majority of people may feel that way. So definitely, I was thinking about that when he was talking about the when he said the 6 pointers he wants to put out there. And that came to mind, but I said, you know what? I don't know if I'm going a little too far, but when he said it, okay, so I'm not that off. Yeah, but I would think definitely this would also play a part as to why they would think that they're different from Europe.
So one of the few European countries that still has a monarchy, not just in form, but in sentiment. And to be honest, I think many Europeans, and I would argue also Americans, kind of envy the UK for this. You know, in France, the revolution wiped the slate clean. In Germany, the Kaiser is long gone. But in Britain, the crown still sits at the center of national life, even if it's mostly symbolic. The monarchy connects the present to a romanticized past. And in a strange way, it reinforces our separateness. You know, we don't just feel different. We're told that we're different by tradition, by ceremony, by the very structure of our state. And again, this is not about reality, it is about symbolism and belief. And then, of course, there is the language. For more on this, I did a whole video on how language is instrumental in nation building. But the fact that we still call it English and not American or Canadian or Australian or South African adds an implicit sense of ownership. You know, English isn't just a language, it's an empire of its own. It allowed Britain to export its culture, but also to insulate itself from others. Now, I've talked about how English is infiltrating many languages throughout Europe, but we don't dub, we don't consume foreign media. Millions in Europe grow up watching British and American TV, but in the UK, you would struggle to find a teenager who's seen a German film or a French series. Language is more than vocabulary, it's a worldview. And as I mentioned in the video that I did on language, it's far more powerful than physical weapons because the language is the vessel for the worldview.
True.
And so when Europeans ask, why don't the British feel European? The answer, in my opinion, is very simple. You know, because Britain has spent centuries constructing a story in which Britain is not European, not just a part, but different, more stable, more global, more measured, less ideological, less revolutionary, less continental. And that story may not be accurate anymore, but national identity is not based on accuracy. It's based on belief, on feelings and on emotions. And the emotion Britain feels towards Europe is at best ambivalent. And so I still think that most Europeans just don't understand this. And even after this video, probably might just be shaking your head in disbelief. This was my attempt to explain the cultural sentiment of the UK towards Europe. This is not my personal point of view. I love Europe. I love the rich density of culture and language that this continent provides. I love Germany, and I think that the British have a lot in common with the Germans and also with the Dutch. But most Brits would not agree with this, or even if they did, they would not like to admit it.
This was a very interesting video. I mean, when I first saw the title, I was like stunned because I'm trying to figure out like, what is he talking about? And I knew it was going to go really philosophical because it had to with that kind of title, but he made a lot of sense. Some of the pointers were really like a dagger. The monarchy aspect, I thought about it because it's a very unique country. He made a great statement where he said that the monarchy actually not just shows in terms of how they have the class structure, but also it connects to the past and the future. So it also gives it like an aura, I would say. And with all the centuries, with films and history books, the way that it's written, it would give you that conclusion that they're different than Europe itself. It's almost like a social engineering to a degree to have that kind of mindset, because when he said like 64%, that's a lot. That's a lot that think that they're not part of Europe. And this is the first time I'm hearing that concept, very first time. So it's interesting. I'm gonna have to ask people that are in the UK, that are born in the UK, that question. Yes, let me see if I'm gonna get a response similar to what he said there, especially the 6 things that he mentioned. Like I said, I'm completely new to this topic. Definitely I'm gonna have to see if there's more videos, not just from him, but other people have made similar videos explaining that whole concept, because it's the first time. So I want to hear if someone can go even deeper than what he's done in this video. So this is fascinating and I want to hear more. If you want to see that long term actually that I do, hit me up on Dyce Reacts, where the music reactions. This is where I'm going to be making my exit. So until next time, peace out.